Welcome back everybody, my name's Nick930 and this is my review for the recently released Metro Exodus. Metro Exodus is the third main entry to the first-person shooter series based heavily around Dmitry Glukhovsky's book Metro 2035. In Metro Exodus, players will venture out from the dark Moscow metro system and begin to explore the radiated Russian countryside. Along the way, players will fight mutants, bandits, and brutal weather conditions as they search for a place that they can call home. The gameplay has been refined significantly since Metro Last Light with a ton of new immersive gameplay mechanics and some solid stealth action elements that take full advantage of the larger gameplay scope. And the game's visuals are some of the most impressive in the industry, bringing even the most powerful gaming PCs to their limits. But before we get into all of that, let's first talk about Metro Exodus' story. Metro Exodus takes place after the events of the previous game Metro Last Light, with the lead protagonist Artyom desperately searching for signs of life outside the gloom and doom of the Moscow metros. After finding a hint of possible survivors outside of Moscow, Artyom and his friends journey out and begin to explore the countryside with the help of a stolen train engine called the Aurora. From here, the game becomes a bit less linear, with massive expanses of land to explore and multiple points of interest. The game is heavily based around its narrative, and it's difficult to really talk about it in detail without spoiling anything. But I will say that most of the events that happen are pretty commonplace in the post-apocalypse style of narrative. The one unique aspect of the older Metro games was that the entire story revolved around society developing a new underground in the Metro system. But now that our heroes are out exploring the actual wasteland, it seems as though the writer is having trouble thinking of interesting and unique ideas for rival factions. There's your slavers, your cannibals, your wild religious cults, and then there's a dramatic main plot point that I can't spoil, but it's so painfully obvious right from the start of the game that it's almost annoying how long it takes for the rest of the cast to finally catch up to what's happening. The story's not bad in any sense, it's one of the better ones in the series in terms of its writing, but it tends to be predictable and doesn't really have the same charm as the past two games. Motion capture and vocal performances are generally top-notch, especially Anna and the various characters you'll meet around the country. But Colonel Miller's vocal performance is disappointing, especially considering how much of a prominent role he serves in the narrative. Moving on from story, let's talk about the gameplay. Metro Exodus' gameplay is brilliant. Rather than opting for a cookie-cutter open-world experience with a checklist of things to do, Metro Exodus is split up into multiple, much smaller, open-ended environments, with the main objective always remaining the ultimate focus. Players have the freedom to explore the areas at their own pace, investigating various points of interest, and taking advantage of the game's built-in day and night cycle to exploit enemy patrol patterns. What I love about this design is that I never felt that I needed to run around and do everything, but the game entices you to explore, as optional locations often hide valuable attachments and upgrades for your gear. Things like improved batteries for your flashlight, a reinforced gas mask, or new attachments for your weapons are all common rewards for exploring locations off the beaten path, and nothing about the experience ever felt repetitive. Each environment is filled with its own share of dangerous enemies and challenges, like the classic Watchers and Demons or packs of wolves and human animals. Enemy soldiers also roam the wasteland, but aren't as simple as you'd expect. Sometimes you can walk straight up to a group of unaware NPCs with your weapon holstered, and they'll acknowledge that you don't want any trouble, allowing you to pass without a fuss. However, this isn't always the case, so you must be careful thinking about the type of people that you're approaching based on their dialogue. And this is at the essence of what Metro Exodus is all about. The game's incredible attention to detail makes it one of the most immersive experiences I've played since Red Dead Redemption 2. Everything you do needs to be thought through carefully, and choosing the stealthy approach is often advised considering how challenging combat encounters can be. You can go in guns blazing, but weapons will overheat with sustained fire, often resulting in a weapon jam, and health doesn't regen quickly, meaning getting into an open firefight is often deadly. Stealth functions similarly to how it worked in Metro Last Light, with a light indicator on Artyom's wrist lighting up when the player is in danger of being spotted, and a sound cue warning of an impending enemy alert. Players can choose to either non-lethally knock enemies out or kill them, which can sometimes affect the dialogue with characters later. To help with stealth encounters, players can shoot out lights or even manually twist bulbs to avoid making a sound. For a real tactical edge, players can sleep at a nearby safe house and wait for nightfall, where enemy patrol patterns will supposedly change. However, every time I tried this, I found that almost all the enemies were in the same positions as before. Still, the increased amount of darkness was almost a necessity in order to navigate through the more populated areas. To get past the more stubborn enemies, you can also throw empty tin cans to distract them, though I found this method to be a bit inconsistent, with guards often refusing to travel outside of their invisible boundaries to investigate things, or just turning the wrong way. I also found that sometimes I'd sneak up on an enemy and the prompt to knock them out wouldn't appear right away, almost resulting in an enemy alert. But for the most part, the stealth segments were incredibly easy, and often have a set path that works perfectly every time, especially for the more elaborate end-level set pieces. On the standard difficulties, both stealth and combat are viable options, but on the more challenging difficulties, combat is practically impossible unless it's required by the mission. Big enemies with heavy armor plating take a ridiculous amount of ammunition and explosives to kill, and the slow healing animations and frequent overheating will likely push you towards the much easier, stealthy approach whenever possible. New to Metro Exodus is the crafting system. Rather than using bullets as currency and buying attachments and low-grade ammunition, Metro Exodus requires players to scavenge the world for junk and use it to craft necessary equipment at weapon benches. These benches are rare and act as temporary safe zones, allowing players to craft ammunition, repair their mask, and even clean their weapons to avoid jamming. While on the go, players can take out a similar menu from their backpack, but are limited to swapping weapon attachments for their already equipped weapons. Weapons are fully customizable with a large assortment of different barrels, stocks, scopes, and magazines, allowing you to truly personalize the way you want to approach situations. I found myself sometimes getting pinned down by enemies in unfavorable conditions, and needing to quickly pull out my backpack and swap attachments in order to give myself the necessary edge. I wish they had kept the attachment swapping system that they initially showcased at E3 in 2018 like Crysis, but I guess this backpack customization menu is more realistic and more original. Moving on from gameplay, we have to talk about the visuals and the performance. Metro Exodus is a beautiful game in every aspect, from its high-resolution texture work to its gorgeous volumetric lighting effects. The level of detail carefully crafted into each environment is unprecedented, and I found myself surprised by some of the things that ended up happening throughout my playthrough. At one point, I found myself in a firefight with a group of bandits in a rundown barn, where I shot an explosive container that lit them on fire. Not only were the effects impressive looking, but the excess heat from this fire caused a tea kettle below to start whistling. This could have been caused by the fact that the enemy tending to this kettle may have been away for too long, but either way, it was a very cool mechanic. Then there's the lighting effects, which just blew me away. Whether it was the middle of the day in the desert with a thick haze or traveling through a humid swamp, beautiful god rays, realistic shadowing, and excellent reflections were present, creating screenshot-worthy scenes at every angle. The only game that even comes close to looking this good are titles built using DICE's Frostbite engine, and even then it's a tough call. Unfortunately, not everything was perfect. I did run into a few visual bugs throughout my playthrough, like enemies clipping through the environment or strange floating debris that would fall to the ground when I walked through it. I also ran into some serious performance-related problems in the second half of the game, where my average frame rates would fall into the low 50s, which is crazy considering I was running this with an i7-8700K processor and an RTX 2080 Ti. Ray tracing, by the way, looks great, but the DLSS setting blurs the image and looks horrible. Rather than dealing with ray tracing and its unacceptable hit to my performance, I disabled both of these features and still found that the game's lighting looked incredible. Still, even with the frame rate dipping down and the occasional stuttering that occurred when walking into a new area early in the game, performance was still good enough where the game was enjoyable, and the slower pace of the action makes it less of an issue than it would have been in a game like Battlefield, for example. Overall, Metro Exodus is an excellent game. Its story, while not the most original, is still well crafted and interesting, with some memorable characters and an enjoyable trip across the Russian countryside. The gameplay is incredibly immersive and had me hooked all the way through, and the game's graphics are some of the best to come out of this console generation. I highly recommend picking this game up and giving it a go, especially if you enjoyed games like Far Cry 2 or any of the previous Metro titles. However, if you want a fast-paced shooter experience or are planning on playing this on a much less powerful PC, then you might want to hold off. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and if you want to learn more about Metro Exodus, be sure to check out my comparison video linked at the end. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.